Built in response to the massive success of Typhoon Lagoon, Disney's Blizzard Beach was supposed to be a step up from their tropical paradise, providing bigger, faster, more thrilling slides across a larger park with a bolder theme, and bringing yet another thing to do at a resort that was now overflowing with different destinations. But since opening, the park has been largely neglected by Disney, relatively unchanged since the 90s, and one of Disney World's most forgotten experiences. I want to take a look at the history of Blizzard Beach, its design, its opening, the small number of changes, and the uncertain future of Disney World's most neglected park. By the mid-90s, Disney had a lot of competition in Central Florida. After a rough opening, Universal Studios was now fully underway. SeaWorld, which had been in the area since 1973, was now looking towards opening big new rides to keep up with its neighbours, and countless other smaller-scale tourist attractions had opened in and around Orlando, looking to receive some of the attention. For many visitors, it was now Orlando, not Disney, that was the theme park destination. If Disney were to stay on top of the theme park industry, they could no longer be content with simply bringing guests in for a day or two. They needed to get them to stay for much longer, and to do that, they needed more things to do at Walt Disney World. Disney World had been gradually expanding its offerings for many years already, but by the 1990s, the resort had seen its expansion accelerate, as then Disney CEO Michael Eisner set out massive plans to mark the company's so-called Disney Decade. Beginning already in 1989 with the opening of Disney MGM Studios and the resort's second water park, Typhoon Lagoon, the following years would bring a major rebrand for Epcot Center, including the new interventions, new e-ticket attractions at Magic Kingdom like Splash Mountain, and a massive number of new hotels, including some under the newly created Disney Vacation Club. Eisner really was doing a lot to expand the breadth of Disney World's offerings, promoting it as a place for more than just families, but for couples, for young people and retired people, promoting more to international visitors too, and importantly, encouraging longer stays at the now massive resort. And Disney was also looking at further expansions beyond Disney World, with several theme parks planned in other locations in America and around the world. Unfortunately, in 1992, the difficult opening of Euro Disneyland in Paris, later rebranded as Disneyland Paris, would end many of the plans for new parks and destinations, and some of the more intricate details of future projects for Disney World would be scaled back. The resort's most ambitious project, a fourth gate set to open at the end of the decade, would go ahead, albeit with several cutbacks. And in the meantime, Disney would set its sights on another, quicker project to further expand its offerings: a third water park. Imagineers began planning the water park immediately following the overwhelming success of Typhoon Lagoon. Typhoon Lagoon did receive lower attendance in its early years than its main competition in Orlando, Wet n Wild, but its daily visitors were still high enough that Disney was regularly having to turn away guests at the gate by midday. And with Disney's other water park, River Country, being far too small to handle the overflow, the company needed another park quickly if they were to keep up with the demand, and eventually dethrone Wet n Wild in Orlando's water park industry. One of the key things that made Typhoon Lagoon stand out as a water park was that the entire place was built around a singular backstory, that of the remains of a town that had been swept up in a tropical storm. The new park would obviously have to be a companion piece to Typhoon Lagoon, but not content on simply making a second tropically themed location, Disney Imagineers wanted the new project to go in a completely different direction. In his office, Imagineer Eric Jacobson had a large collection of snow globes, and it was from these snow globes that inspiration for the new backstory was said to arrive. Not a tropical destination, but a winter one. A ski resort where the slopes would be the slides, and the new park would be named Blizzard Beach. The legend Disney wrote for Blizzard Beach, as detailed in Disney World's 25th anniversary book, was that a freak winter storm had covered the entire west side of Walt Disney World in snow, prompting a local business to begin building Orlando's first ever ski resort. Extensive slopes, a wooden lodge, a ski lift, and even a ski jump were built. But right before the location was ready to welcome its first guests, the Florida heat returned, and all the snow melted. Initially disappointed that their venture had been an immediate failure, the operators at the ski resort then noticed a Florida alligator hurtling down one of the melted slopes, and realized that the remains of the resort could be turned into a water park. And so, Blizzard Beach was born. Obviously, in reality, the place was intended to be a water park from the outset, but there was actually a winter storm that covered large parts of Florida in snow in 1977 that may have served as an inspiration for the backstory. A lot of sources online even reference this exact storm as being the one in the Blizzard Beach story, but I couldn't find any official Disney sources confirming this, so I think these two stories just got conflated somewhere along the way. Supposedly, early into the development of Blizzard Beach, plans were also made for the park to open with its own hotel, named Disney's Alpine Resort, which would have sat just north of the park and allowed guests to travel there via a ski lift. However, plans for this were eventually cancelled, mainly due to the fact that with water parks often requiring extensive maintenance during the winter, many guests who stayed there would have to spend their trip next to a closed park. And so the area where the Alpine Hotel would have gone was eventually used for Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in 1997. The gator from the backstory would become the mascot of the new park. In early concepts, he was a typical Florida alligator, but as time went on, he was given a more distinct, cartoony design, coloured blue, and named Ice Gator. A companion gator named Lagoon Gator would also be added retroactively to Typhoon Lagoon, and one would be drawn up for River Country, but ultimately never used. And on April Fool's Day 1995, a costumed ice skater would join Disney, the media, and a group of snowmen in officially opening Blizzard Beach to the public. At the entrance to the park, guests would find the main gift shop, guest services buildings, towel and locker rental areas, and changing rooms that you typically find in a water park, all stylized as Swiss chalet buildings, color coordinated in purple and turquoise, the main colors of the park. Throughout these buildings and around the entrance, they'd also find evidence of the melt that had devastated the skiing aspirations of the area. In a corner on their left as they entered, guests would first find Sunny's Sleds, a photo op themed as a sled and toboggan shop, forced to close now the snow had melted. Further along, the main ski lodge had become the Lotta Water Lodge, or, Lotta Water Lodge, still with very small remnants of the snow and some icicles clinging to the roof. Not actually a ski lodge, but the park's main quick-service dining restaurant, but perhaps distantly connected to that cancelled hotel once planned for Blizzard Beach. Opposite the lodge was another photo op, two snowman parents capturing the first steps of their daughter Button. A heartwarming scene, although the water dripping from the dad's nose may suggest that warming is exactly what's happening, and maybe their vacation will be over sooner than expected. And from here, guests would also get their first view of the rest of the park. Much like Typhoon Lagoon before it, Blizzard Beach was built around a main mountain at the back of the park, around which all of the main slides were built, with smaller additional areas off to the side. Across the park, there were more assorted pieces of theming, showing how the locals had tried to hurriedly adapt their businesses to the sudden melt. Snowplow vehicles and snow machines dotted throughout the park. Also like Typhoon Lagoon, Blizzard Beach did have its own wave pool, named Meltaway Bay, to serve as the central meeting area. But unlike its counterpart, Meltaway Bay was off to one side and much smaller. Its waves also didn't reach the same size as the surf pool, and really were more of a swell. Disney had already done a large wave pool, and so the plan wasn't to repeat the same idea here. Instead, the focus of Blizzard Beach would fall centrally on the slides. All of Blizzard Beach's opening day slides still exist today, so let's first go through the park as it existed when it first opened. In the Eisner manner of every new addition to Disney World needing to be bigger, more outlandish, and more thrilling than the last, Blizzard Beach's goal was to outdo the already impressive Typhoon Lagoon. One of the ways it tried to do this was by being larger, at 66 acres, but mainly the draw that Blizzard Beach would have over its sister park was that its slides were faster and more exhilarating. And so, whereas the centerpiece and icon of Typhoon Lagoon was Mount Mayday and Miss Tilly, a thematic decoration but not an attraction itself, Blizzard Beach's icon would be its tallest, fastest water slide, Summit Plummet. 120 feet tall, and sitting at the top of the park's mountain, Mount Gushmore, guests would see the imposing ski jump ramp. On the side of a building near the entrance, guests could also find a gator-shaped hole in the wall. And now, with the rest of the park in view, they'd find that it lined up perfectly with the distant ski ramp. A really cool thematic detail for this park. Of course, the slide itself wouldn't actually send guests flying into the air like Ice Skater, but instead would drop underneath the ramp and through a tunnel. 360 feet long and with a near vertical drop at the beginning, Summit Plummet was the tallest and fastest free-fall water slide in the world, reaching speeds of nearly 60 miles an hour. In terms of its design, it was set up in a typical Disney design, utilizing the forced perspective of a narrower, smaller top compared to its base to make the jump seem more distant, taller, and more dramatic. Although, unlike the illusion created by something like Miss Tilly, it was an illusion that was frequently broken when people could be seen going down the slide. Summit Plummet could be reached by climbing a trail up the side of Mount Gushmore, or by taking a chairlift to the top from near the entrance of the park. The queues that snaked through Mount Gushmore showed more signs of the local businesses trying to adapt to the changing temperatures, with artificial snow machines dripping with water as more snow melted around them. As well as just being a good slide, Summit Plummet offered, and continues to offer, some of the best views of the rest of Disney World. All of the major icons and tallest buildings of Walt Disney World are visible from the top of the ski ramp. And because it's not in one of the main parks, it's one of the few places where you can see all of them at once. At the entrance to the queue, guests could also choose to queue for two other slides that set off from this part of the mountain. The first of these was Slush Gusher, another fast body slide, not quite as steep as Summit Plummet, 90 feet long with bouncing hills. And the other was Teamboat Springs, probably the second best ride in the park. A family raft ride for 4 to 6 people, 1,200 feet long, the longest raft ride in the world, winding around the edge of the park and dropping rafts off at the base of the mountain. Climbing a separate staircase up the mountain, there were also two other sets of slides. Blizzard Beach's mat slides, a style of slide that Typhoon Lagoon didn't have, ridden headfirst on a mat, rather than the more common tube or body slides. First were the toboggan races, where guests raced each other in 8 lanes over similar hills as next door Slush Gusher. And second were the snowstormers, 3 winding slides themed as a ski slalom course, washing out into a plunge pool. The final main slide area was around the back of Mount Gushmore, where guests could ride Runoff Rapids, a group of 3 tube slides, 2 open and 1 enclosed. In addition to the main slides, Blizzard Beach also opened with 2 kids areas. Tyke's Peak was for younger kids, and had a splash pad play area similar to the one at Typhoon Lagoon, and some kids-sized body and tube slides mimicking the larger ones in the rest of the park. And the Ski Patrol training camp was an area for older kids, with slightly larger tube and body slides, a floating iceberg balance course, and a T-bar zipline into a plunge pool. And lastly, similar to Castaway Creek, Blizzard Beach had a lazy river encircling the park named Cross Country Creek, where guests could float past various pieces of theming, adding to the story of the park. like more snow machines and ice skaters' cabins. Water would drip from various decorations, and that water would be much colder than the pools, making it seem as if it was melted snow. And underneath Mount Gushmore, Cross Country Creek would go through the ice caverns, which featured prehistoric cave drawings of a woolly mammoth, snowman, and an early ancestor of Ice Gator. Also, it's taken me this long to realize that Ice Gator is a pun of Ice Skater. Those were all the attractions available at Blizzard Beach when it opened to the public. But the water park was supposed to open with one more. In articles and promotional material written about it before it opened, another tube slide was advertised named Mogul Mania. I first found out about the existence of this attraction in a video made about it by the channel Theme Park Crazy, which I'll link in the description. Mogul Mania was a slide styled after mogul skiing over those small mounds of snow named moguls. Mogul Mania wasn't cancelled like the hotel was, and it did end up being built, and was even featured in a Disney sing-along VHS tape named Beach Party, which had a segment filmed at the park shortly before it opened. As far as water slides go, it was quite an unusual design, because rather than being one long tube with a continuous stream of water to carry riders, it was instead a much wider fiberglass sheet with jets of water sprayed over from above. The plan was that guests would slide down it in a tube, bouncing across the bumps. Unfortunately, when it was tested, it was found out that that bouncing was way too aggressive, and riders would hit the moguls and get launched, and the hard fiberglass would make for a very rough landing. Also, to me, I think a big problem with this design was that the bouncing was not very consistent or controlled. Different people would hit the moguls in different ways and at different speeds, and so they'd take off in different directions, some of them falling out of their tubes as a result. They'd lose momentum, and unlike a typical slide where the steady, continuous movement has an effect of kind of washing out the riders at a constant pace, they'd have to get up and get back on, which would massively increase the risk that they'd end up colliding with the next rider. Simply put, it was a massive safety issue. And so Mogul Mania was removed shortly before the park opened and replaced with two more normal tube slides named Cool Runners, which emptied out into the ski patrol area. Blizzard Beach opened in much the same way as Typhoon Lagoon, to a very positive reception, and 1 year after its opening, the park received its first new addition, a pair of racing tube slides around the side of Mount Gushmore named Downhill Double Dipper. Decorated with a start and finish line, race timing, and emptying out into their own new plunge pool, these slides did open in the summer of 1996, but they were closed very shortly afterwards to be reworked after a combination of safety issues and issues with the timing not working properly, opening only sporadically until the following year where they saw more regular operation. By 1998, Blizzard Beach and Typhoon Lagoon were both receiving over 1 million visitors annually, putting them in second and third place for water park attendance, just behind Wet n Wild. Walt Disney World also received another massive boost to its offerings with the opening of its fourth theme park, Animal Kingdom. And by the end of the summer, the resort as a whole boasted a staggering number of different attractions and activities. Late 1998 may well have been the very best time ever to visit Walt Disney World. The place had 4 theme parks, 3 water parks, a shopping area, an entertainment district, a sports complex, a wildlife exhibit, a golf course, a mini golf course, and a ton of other offerings. Mini golf in particular was added to Walt Disney World in 1996, with the Fantasia Gardens miniature golf course just north of MGM Studios, a course themed to different scenes from the movie Fantasia. And 3 years later, in 1999, a second mini golf course was added to the resort connected to Blizzard Beach, named Winter Summerland. Winter Summerland is technically a separate experience from Blizzard Beach, but you could argue it as being one of Blizzard Beach's expansions. It's frequently grouped in with the water park because it's built on the same land, and they both carry a very similar theme. The backstory of Winter Summerland is vaguely related to that same snow in Florida story as Blizzard Beach. One Christmas Eve, Santa Claus spotted the snow and decided to return to Florida to build a vacation retreat for his elves. He split the retreat into two camps, one for elves that enjoyed the sun, and one for the elves that preferred the cold of the North Pole. And so Winter Summerland received two courses, the summer and winter courses. As Disney World entered the new decade, its two water parks both eventually overtook Wet n Wild as the most attended in the country. In 2005, Blizzard Beach celebrated its 10th anniversary, and Typhoon Lagoon welcomed a new expansion with the opening of the massive water coaster, Crush and Gusher. But despite this anniversary, Blizzard Beach didn't receive any new slides of its own. The downhill Double Dipper remained the only new addition the park had received since opening. As the 2000s became the 2010s, the park had been around for more than 15 years, with still no sign of anything new. In fact, small elements of its early years were even removed. Ice Skater used to appear from opening into the early 2000s as a walk-around character, taking pictures with guests. But as the years went on, these appearances became less and less frequent, until eventually he disappeared altogether. And by the 2010s, he only existed in the park as a statue and a cartoon on various signs, and Goofy took his place as the park's new character. In 2016, Wet n Wild closed in Orlando, and the following year, Universal opened a brand new water park, Volcano Bay, clearly inspired by the Disney water parks, with its own super fast slides and water coasters, with a Polynesian theme, and its own iconic mountain. And so just ahead of Volcano Bay's opening, Typhoon Lagoon added the family raft ride, Misadventure Falls. But still, nothing new opened at Blizzard Beach. Aside from the removal of Ice Skater, the only real change of any sort since about 1996 was that sometime in the 2000s, new signs were added, and the slides on Mount Gushmore were color-coded to group them together into the green, purple, and red slopes, an allusion to the way that ski slopes are typically color-coded by difficulty, but one that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. You'd expect that maybe the more intense slides could correspond to higher difficulty ratings, but the colors used aren't standard gradings anywhere. They're just kind of random colors. And Summit Plummet, the most intense slide in the park, is in the green area, a color that, if anything, is usually used on ski slopes for beginner courses. It had now been more than 20 years since Blizzard Beach's opening, and the place had received only the most minimal changes. It's not realistic to expect water parks to receive the same amount of attention as a regular theme park, and Typhoon Lagoon had not received a huge amount of changes either, but Blizzard Beach in particular felt hugely neglected. In terms of attendance, it was still consistently one of the most popular water parks in America, but it had always remained a firm second place to its sister park. The location that was supposed to be an upgrade, physically larger and with more exciting attractions, had not managed to surpass it, and it just sat in obscurity, almost exactly the same as it had been in the 90s, a window into Disney's past. In 2020, the entire Disney resort closed for an extended period of time as a result of the global pandemic, and when it reopened, both water parks remained closed. It took until 2021 for Blizzard Beach to tentatively reopen, although the new era of Disney World came with a catch. The park's annual maintenance period would be extended, and it would spend many months over the next few years closed as it alternated opening alongside Typhoon Lagoon, with neither park being open at the same time. Strangely though, when Blizzard Beach had its second reopening in November 2022, for the first time since 1996, it had a new addition. Sort of. The Tykes Peak area was slightly reworked. keeping its name but adding in characters from Frozen. Characters that do fit with the broader winter theme of the park, and ones that definitely make sense to add considering the area is aimed at preschoolers, but it is quite sad to think about when you realize that they replaced several Gator characters, and Ice Gator's presence had now been scaled back even further. The intermittent operation of Blizzard Beach in the early 2020s represented a further neglect by Disney. After everything had got back to normal, it seemed like this was the new normal for the water parks, never being open at the same time, potentially even heading for permanent closure. Until that is, this year, when in April 2025, Disney announced for the first time in 5 years, both water parks were going to operate through the summer at the same time. On April 1st, Blizzard Beach celebrated its 30th anniversary, and the park held a small-scale celebration with a DJ, commemorative pins, and a scavenger hunt. Typhoon Lagoon then opened a month later on May 1st, as Blizzard Beach temporarily closed until May 21st, which as of recording this video has not yet happened, when the park will reopen and both Blizzard Beach and Typhoon Lagoon will be operational. A real positive for the future of Disney's water parks. In a Q&A on the official Disney planning website, Plan Disney, one user asked about the disappearance of the walk-around Ice Gator from the park. The response they got said, "This month is the 30th anniversary of Blizzard Beach, and some special events have been planned to celebrate. You never know who might join the party." Ice Gator was not present at the 30th anniversary celebration. Blizzard Beach set out to be an improvement on Typhoon Lagoon, expanding the scale and providing a greater thrill factor that was bigger and better than its predecessor. And to its credit, there is a lot to love about the park. A winter-themed water park is such an unusual idea, and a really fresh and interesting approach in an area dominated by Caribbean and Pacific tropical themes. So many water parks ultimately boil down to the same basic looks, and Blizzard Beach is just so different in that way. The slides are great. Blizzard Beach wanted to be a thrill water park, and it achieved that. Summit Plummet in particular is one of the few rides across the whole of Disney World that I get genuinely nervous to go on. And a chairlift in a water park is such a wacky idea, you can't not love it. But when I try and think about it more critically, I think it does pale in comparison to Typhoon Lagoon, particularly with its theming. One of the things that disappoints me with Blizzard Beach is that while it does have a central story, to me it doesn't feel like it commits to it to quite the same extent as Typhoon Lagoon does. Everything about the way the theming of the park and the attractions are designed just feels better executed there than at Blizzard Beach. The way the reveal of the park is presented works so much better with guests sighting Mount Mayday than it does with them seeing Summit Plummet. In my opinion, the different directions the attractions take their premise is much better executed with things like the abandoned fruit factory of Crush and Gusher than it is by simply having different varieties of ski slope like they do at Blizzard Beach. And the way Miss Tilly's foghorn goes off every so often, and the way that the waves regularly hit from the surf pool act as constant reminders of the story for guests, so they're always within eyesight or earshot of the key thematic elements of the park. Whereas the closest thing Blizzard Beach has to something like this is maybe the way the water jet shoots out over the Summit Plummet ramp, something that's very easy to miss. Each aspect of the environmental storytelling at Typhoon Lagoon is just done better than at Blizzard Beach. Typhoon Lagoon is Disney's water park, and Blizzard Beach is the extra. Blizzard Beach's theming feels a lot more cartoony, which isn't necessarily negative. Whether you prefer one over the other is more down to personal taste. It allows for more gags, but maybe causes it to skip out on some of the detail that Typhoon Lagoon has in favor of a Mickey's Toontown style of design. And of course, Typhoon Lagoon has actually received updates over the years. They're both neglected to some extent, but Blizzard Beach is so much more forgotten by Disney in comparison. If you don't count the small bits of set dressing at Tyke's Peak, it's received nothing since 1996. It's a place that often draws criticism for still looking like it's in the 90s, and that's because it essentially is. So while Blizzard Beach was supposed to outdo Typhoon Lagoon, it's now fallen behind it. Beyond not receiving new things, the general maintenance of the park has slipped over the years. In a very fitting manner for the high-speed nature of the place, Summit Plummet opened with a speedometer at the exit, telling you how fast you went down the slide. But nowadays, the speedometer is frequently broken, and it's not even clear to me if it's ever operated in the last 5 or so years. While there may have been a 30th anniversary celebration recently, it was incredibly basic. And the one day you might expect Ice Skater to make a return, he didn't. I do think that the summer operation in 2025 is a major positive for the future of Blizzard Beach, but I am also a little worried that this is only a trial run, and the continued tandem operation with Typhoon Lagoon may not continue into 2026. What the park desperately needs is some sort of expansion, in the same way as the ones that were added to Typhoon Lagoon, particularly when it can't really claim the high thrill water park title anymore, with the types of slides that are available at more modern places like Volcano Bay or even the ones at Aquatica. If Blizzard Beach is supposed to be the park with the high thrill slides, it really needs to start adding some of these modern innovations. Trapdoor slides have been around for at least 15 years now, and there still isn't one at Blizzard Beach. Something like that would be really fitting and could play a small part in bringing it into the modern era. But I think any expansion for the water parks at all is just incredibly unlikely for the foreseeable future. What are your thoughts about Blizzard Beach? Which of Disney's 2 water parks do you prefer, and what are your hopes for the future of the park? Let me know in the comments. This video is the much requested conclusion to my trilogy on the history of Disney World's water parks. So if you haven't seen my other videos on River Country and Typhoon Lagoon, make sure to give those a watch as well. Other than that, if you haven't already, please consider hitting subscribe, as more videos are always coming in the future, and as always, I'll see you next time.